Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are more than excited about this webinar, which is part of a project that we're also very excited about. It's interesting, we knew that circular economy was an issue or a new discussion that we wanted to have, and so we started by bringing in Wayne Hubbard from London to speak at our conference last year, and we had so much positive response from the municipalities that we knew that circular cities was the way for us to go. And so what we did is we started doing some research on, okay, well, how do we actually do that? How do we make a circular cities project? How do we start to introduce our municipalities to this concept? And as we started to do the research, repeatedly circular economy came up as the resource and the experts in this area. And that's why we then went to circular economy and had some conversations, and we're lucky enough to even meet with Matthew to talk about what we could do to learn from what's happened in other places in the world and to learn from their experiences. So then we came up with this idea of actually having a webinar as an introduction that would be led by circular economy. And I also want to acknowledge EcoTrust for helping to fund this webinar, and I think this is going to give us a really good kickoff, and then we'll certainly talk next steps later. So I want to turn this over to Matthew and the circular economy folks, who then will jump right into the webinar. And again, thanks everybody for joining us, and I look forward to a very productive project.
Great, thank you, Christina. Yeah, I will just do a quick personal introduction. So I'm Matthew Fraser, actually originally born in Canada, just outside of Toronto, but now I've been living in the Netherlands for just about 12 years. So I did my master's here and quickly started working in the field of sustainability just at the time when circular economy was picking up. So had a lot of really good early experiences helping companies and municipalities and entrepreneurs really try to understand the fundamentals. And in the past 7 or 8 years, the topic has truly exploded, not only definitely within the Netherlands, but throughout Europe. And now it's really nice to see other countries and other cities throughout the world pick up the topic and really try to dive in. And I think what's nice for us to see, and we'll talk a lot about it, but there's a lot of really good and sort of credible things happening both on the policy and the business side. So it's really not sort of greenwashing. There really is a lot of meat to the bone per se in terms of really actually systemically changing our economy to a more circular one. So I'm joined here by my colleague, Jordi Pasquale, and we both work together on the cities team. So I'll leave it at that for now because we also have an introduction within the presentation itself, but maybe you just want to add a few words.
Yes, well, hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. As Matthew said, my name is Jordi Pasquale. I am a colleague of Matthew in the cities team. I work as a project manager. And well, I am originally from Barcelona, from Spain. And well, my background is actually in economics and business, so it's a different angle. But before joining the circular economy, I was working in strategic consultancy, working mainly for the public sector and also some multinational firms. And at some point, I got very interested in the circular economy topic, and also mainly about this systemic change. How can we engage with businesses? How we can engage with citizens? How can we incentivize them to move towards circular economy? And I like a lot this systemic change that we need to do in order to move towards a more sustainable and yeah, circular world, basically.
Yeah, great. I will switch over to the presentation in that case, and just one moment as I try to figure out actually how to screen share here. Thought I had the option actually, sorry about that.
Maybe just switch here and ask if.
Yeah, I don't think, so I think everybody's seeing me or us. 1 second, sorry about that. Screen share in the bottom bar. Okay, great, thanks for that. Interesting. Share? Oh yeah. Yes, great. Perfect. Does everybody see the presentation at this point? Okay.
Check it out. If are you all seeing the presentation at the moment? Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Great. Thank you for the
Sorry
patience.
for that. Yes.
Great. So today we're going to talk a little bit about circular economy in cities. So as we were just introducing, both of us work on the cities team within circular economy. And circular economy itself has been around since 2012. And its origins were mostly, as I was introducing, helping large business, small business entrepreneurs, but also government officials at a national, provincial, and city level, basically figure out what the circular economy means for them and what they can practically do about it. And I think within those practical origins is really where circular economy has found its roots. So what we do on the cities team specifically is help cities understand what's going on within their current political agenda, what are the current activities, how engaged are businesses within the city or within the urban environment, but also try to assess where there are key opportunities where to make the difference, in essence. So how to really advance circular economy, either by focusing on topics like food or certain sectors, or even certain policy areas like health and well-being or mobility. Our work always really drives towards practical outputs. So instead of writing long documents and pieces of advice, we always try to steer more towards multi-stakeholder workshops where people can really contribute their individual expertise, really shaping practical pilot projects that we can implement very soon on the short term, but also have the scalability potential to be something substantial within 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. So we really try to have our feet on the ground, and we always work with local partners and engage with local experts to really try to understand the unique characteristics and the nature of the cities that we work with. So the way that we work with cities, as I was saying, is not only on the ground, but we actually have a process, and that process is called the Circle City Scan. It's very action oriented. So the idea is that we spend about a year or sometimes about 9 months going through these 4 phases that you see here. So the first is actually very much us listening to the city. So really understanding what the socioeconomic landscape is. So things like I was saying, what are current policies around sustainable development or the environment or innovation? What is the composition of industry in the city and around the city? What is the labor market like? How is labor sort of divided across the industries, and where are things going? And also things like historical analysis of how the city was formed. So oftentimes you have sort of cities rapidly growing and booming around a certain industry, like the oil industry, but legislation may take hold, and those industries tend to disappear. These things are really interesting for us to try to understand what the background is and potentially what the futures could be for this city. The second step of our analysis is the material flow analysis, and that's very much sort of core to the whole circular economy approach, really understanding the sort of metabolism of resources and materials within cities, where they come from, how they move and transform within cities, but also where they go. So waste management and even beyond that. That's really the cornerstone of our analysis. So we would look into, for example, 3 sectors. really try to understand in depth what that metabolism looks like, but also looking at impacts and juxtaposing that with the ambitions of the city that we've discovered in the first phase, trying really to understand key opportunities to push the needle forward. So where, for instance, can we really make a difference by implementing circular economy strategies? And that really brings us into the third phase, where we try to take a deep dive into those specific strategies. So we go from something high level like food waste as a topic, drilling down to something very, very specific like apps for municipal offices that manage the procurement, inventory, and management of food waste specifically. And what we try to do there is really expand out and look at who are the relevant sort of change makers, businesses, policy experts, NGOs, who are the people that we really need to bring around the table who can tell us what exactly the local context is, where exactly this could happen, and what it could look like. And what we try to do together through a multi-stakeholder workshop is really drill down into what could a tangible pilot project look like that we could, in essence, start tomorrow. Once we've discovered what those tangible pilot projects are, we then move into the final phase, which is really an action plan. So as I was saying before, how do we get started? Who's owning the project? Who would be within the sort of broader project team? Who are the customers, and what can we learn? But also, how do we scale this so that it's not just a quick flash in the pan, but actually it has a long-term trajectory that can grow and expand not even within the city, but even regionally, provincially, or even nationally. So how do we really pick up momentum? And as I was saying in the beginning, we always work with a local organization who obviously has expert knowledge on the local context, but a lot of good connections. And we really try to sort of transform or transfer ownership over to them such that we can sort of safely walk away as experts, but giving them the right tools and insights and sort of formula to scale that up. So in essence, that's what our Circle City Scan looks like. And from about 2015 to today, we've now worked with about 15 cities throughout Europe, but also beyond. And we've had quite a lot of good pilot projects emerge from that, but now also even different policy innovations as well. So we'll get into all of those details, but maybe just moving on. What I'd like to focus on this webinar is some basic questions. So first being, what is the circular economy? And I won't dwell on that too much. It won't be too much of a basic course, but just answering, in essence, what the circular economy is, but also underlining why it's really urgent today and why it's really suitable for the type of challenges that we see in cities. I can also speak to a little bit of where we are today in the transition. So globally, how are we doing? How circular are we? I think departing from that, I would like to focus and zoom in on cities and really explore what some of the best practices are looking around the world. So the sort of cream of the crop, what are some really excellent examples of circular economy in practice, at which point Jordi will also take a deep dive into the city of Amsterdam, which is probably one of the most advanced cities right now, and we're working with them constantly as we speak. We have a number of projects, but also a slightly different focus, the city of Glasgow in Scotland, which has had much more of a business engagement focus. So we'll take a few more deep dives in there and begin to answer some questions about, how did they get started? Who did they need to get the ball rolling, and how are they thinking about evolving their position and their role into the future? Then finally, I just have a few slides at the end speaking about how you can accelerate that change. But I really see that as more of a transition in the presentation, our presentation itself, into more of a discussion. So that part of the presentation is a little bit more open-ended, and I hope that it begins to get the juices flowing, the creative juices flowing. And I think that would be a good time to transition into an open discussion. So in terms of the format and time of the webinar itself, we hope to keep our presentation well within 1 hour, and we have a full other hour for open discussion. And I think the way that we'll do that is just through that Q&A box that we were playing around with earlier. So for those maybe who weren't online, I think just on the bottom bar of the window, you can see a little Q&A icon, and you can just type in your questions there. Jordi and I can see that, and we can answer your questions as they come. Great. Then I think we'll just proceed. So what is the circular economy? I think today we can characterize our current economy as being mostly linear. Of course, that isn't completely true. We do recycle things like aluminum cans and glass. But in essence, the way that our global economy is structured is that we take raw material resources, so fossil fuels, ores, biomass, things like that. We pump them through our various production and manufacturing processes to make things like products and services. Those products and services are consumed and more or less fully wasted. So a lot of the value of those products and services are lost. And traditionally, that means either landfill, incineration, sometimes with energy recovery, and mostly in the Western world, recycling. And of course, there are things like the Salvation Army where you can, sort of recycle or pass on your clothing, for example, but that's not really a sort of formal channel within the current economy. Imagine if we were to shift that more towards recycling, where still we take resources from the earth, we transform them through manufacturing and processing, we consume them, and we recycle them. That's kind of getting close, but still we would see a lot of value loss. So again, you would be sort of condensing down, crushing down a lot of those resources into sort of basic categories or clusters of materials. But in essence, that value of the product itself is lost. In a circular economy, what we really strive for is to keep the value of those materials and resources at as high a quality as possible for as long as possible. So it's not just about recycling, but it's really thinking about how we can keep those materials flowing and reflowing and recirculating in our society. And that really requires quite a paradigm shift, quite a systemic way of thinking. So I would also underline the fact that it's not just about waste management. I think circular economy is often viewed through the lens of waste management, but it's very much more about changing the system. So what we would like to see is, what we'd like to ask is, so how do we live our lives with a very high standard of living, a very high social welfare, social foundation? So what you can see in the middle of this diagram here are sort of common social and health indicators like standard of education, nutrition, food, water, energy, these sort of things. Obviously, these are the types of things that we would absolutely want to optimize for as many people around the planet as possible. At the same time, we have to consider what the sort of carrying capacity of the planet is. So there's some research that's been going on now for, I think, over a decade from Sweden that's looking at essentially the indicators of planetary health, such as climate change or chemical pollution or nitrogen and phosphorus leakage into the environment. The bad news here is that out of the total of 9 indicators, we've already gone beyond 4. So we're not doing quite well. And from a social foundation point of view, obviously in the West, things are looking quite good. But the majority of the world is still falling quite short on the social foundation. So the way that we view the circular economy is, how do we maximize that social foundation? So how do we provide, let's say, services and products for people that can maximize their social performance while also maintaining a very healthy and stable environment? So just to bring that back down to something more tangible, what could that look like in sort of tangible products like a car or a light bulb or food? So looking at a car, for example, on the social side, what is it that we would ideally want in an ideal world? Well, it probably doesn't have to do with owning a car. In fact, that's probably quite a pain. You have a lot of payments, cars are expensive, gas is expensive. What you would really want, ideally, is absolute on-demand, full access to mobility services. So whether that's a car, train, bus, bicycle, scooter, wherever you are, whatever flavor of mobility you'd want, ideally, you would want to sort of maximize your accessibility to those forms of mobility. It would also be efficient, it would also be affordable, and it would match your needs over time. So when you're taking your family for a vacation, obviously something like a van would be more suitable than a Tesla Roadster, which you may prefer for a date on Saturday night. Looking on the environmental side, though, the circular economy can actually provide the solution by reducing the total number of vehicles by maximizing the autonomy of those vehicles to go around within the mobility network. So, for instance, here in Europe, we often have these bike racks where you have either free or almost free sort of bicycle rentals, and you just drop them off and pick them up wherever there's a station. Or Tesla actually being a great example, that's now switching or now integrating self-driving functionality into almost all of its vehicles. You can now sort of press a button and turn your car into a taxi, and that car can drive around, pick people up all day long. Whereas currently, I think it's estimated that your car sits idle or just in the parking lot or in your driveway about 94% of its life. So by optimizing the sort of resource use or the efficiency of resource use of that vehicle, we can save dramatically on the environmental impacts of mobility, the whole mobility sector in general. Moving on to the example of the light bulb, again, I don't think anybody necessarily really wants to own a light bulb. What you want is high quality lighting, fully customizable to your home or your office or your whatever environment you're in, the street, the amphitheater. Again, matching your needs over time, affordable, and if possible, no maintenance. I think that would be sort of ideal state for how we would want a light bulb to look from a social point of view. On the environmental point of view, what we could say is we don't actually sell light bulbs anymore, but we sell light, so lumens or lux, as a service. And that's precisely what the company Philips is doing. Instead of selling you 10 or 20 light bulbs for your home, they'll consult you on your lighting needs and provide you sort of units of light, so lumens or hours of light, including maintenance costs, including all the different types of light that you would need, and you don't have to worry about it. The benefit there from an environmental side is that Philips, once the light bulb is either reached its end of life or you don't have a need for it anymore, they can take that back, they can disassemble it, crack it open, take out the usable parts, refurbish it, or even if the light bulb works perfectly, they can even pass that along to another user. So the idea there would be that you can actually design a light bulb for multiple products, multiple life cycle, and all you need to worry about as a consumer is that you have adequate lighting needs at all time. Finally, moving on to food. Again, you might say, you know, I don't necessarily want to buy food or to have food per se, but what you actually want is high quality food, high quality nutrition, your choice, always fresh, affordable and accessible. And from a circular economy point of view, we would basically try to optimize the environmental side of that by closing the loop on not only farming practices, but the whole food processing chain, making sure that all the nutrients and the biomass are kept flowing in that cycle, that food is grown according to the needs. So that's also something unique to cities, is that obviously a lot of people live in cities, there's a high concentration of consumption. You would want to think about how to maybe integrate food production systems within the urban landscape such that you always have those needs, the sort of baseline of those needs fulfilled as much as possible. And especially when it comes to freshness, there are certain things that cities can do really well. So rooftop gardens or neighborhood gardens like we have in Amsterdam, but even thinking about unused basements for mushroom production, a lot of different agricultural functions can actually move a lot closer to cities and work in a much more closed loop way where resources are cascaded in much tighter and closer loops. We would also want to maximize the value of unconsumed food, so food waste, making sure that food consumers or places like restaurants also have very easy to use and very simple channels to find where food waste or almost expired food from grocery stores, for example, can be utilized. So again, we're trying to shift the paradigm a little bit where we're trying to understand what would be optimal from a social point of view and then sort of almost reverse engineer that from an environmental point of view, such that, again, you can kind of get all the service for as less environmental impact as possible. And we'll go through a whole bunch of examples as we move on, but I hope that was clear for now. So maybe just zooming out, where do we stand today? Obviously, I was describing how we currently live in a linear economy. I said that that's also technically not fully the case. And this is an infographic that we made a few years ago in what we call the Circularity Gap report. So if you look at the bottom right-hand side of the screen here, you can actually find out that you can find 2 reports now that we've produced in the last 2 consecutive years that look actually into the state of circularity at the global level. So you can see a web link there in your field. You can check that out. It's a very nice website, but you can also download the full reports there. What this infographic in the middle shows is that we're only about 9.1% circular globally. So just as I was explaining in the linear economy, you can see with that sort of nice rainbow curve that we sort of capture and extract a lot of resources from the earth, about 84 gigatons per year to sustain our global economy, which is a lot. That gets pumped into, well, the whole manufacturing process, but it's in essence to satisfy our global needs. So what I was saying with the social foundation, food, shelter, all those sort of things. And a part of that goes into what we would call stock additions. So if you imagine that a new neighborhood is being built, obviously a forest is being cut down somewhere, wood is being harvested and manufactured, and that wood will go to construct the homes and will stay in the homes for probably 50, 60, or 100 years. So every year we're adding a small amount of sort of permanent material to the earth. So it's not necessarily flowing through fully. What we do have is about 18 gigatons of waste every year, and globally, waste management is not very efficient. About 1.4 gigatons is being landfilled, about 9.7 tons is being lost. So what that practically means is emissions or dispersion. Another 1.3 gigatons is being incinerated, and only about 9.1% of all of that is really being cycled back into the system. So you can actually think of that as being things like glass, aluminum, and to a certain extent paper, which the recycling industries for those materials have been around for quite a while. It's very well established, and those materials can cycle for a long time. But when you look at more complex products like electronics or clothing, that picture really breaks down quite dramatically. The only thing that I would say here is actually our world is becoming more and more complicated. So when you look at the types of products that we have around us, they are in essence more and more complicated. So whereas clothing in the past, 100 years ago, used to be either cotton or hemp or something quite basic, now you have all kinds of sort of hybrids where you have 30% cotton, 60% polyester, 10% elastane. This makes things much, much harder to handle from a waste management point of view. So we're really actually digging ourselves into a bit of a deeper hole where the possibility to cycle things back into our economy is actually becoming more and more difficult given the type of products that exist within our economy. So as I mentioned, the full reports are online, and I highly encourage you to check them out. Next year, we'll be coming out with a new version. I'm not sure exactly what will be the focus, but we're really trying to take also much more of a country focus, so looking at maybe more regional situations, either China or North America or Europe, but really trying to drill down deeper into how do we solve this problem, and actually how do we get beyond this 9.1, and how do we steadily build that out to hopefully 100%. I think cities are actually an interesting area to focus on. So this is really what we do on the cities team. But if you look at cities, I think so globally, cities only make up about 3 or 4% of the total land surface on Earth. So that's really, really small, 3 or 4%. That being said, 50% of population, of the global population lives in cities. I think by 2050, that will be closer to 70. And I think even projections by 2100 even point to 85 or 90%. So the future of humanity in many senses really depends on how cities are designed. About 2/3 of global energy is consumed in cities, and furthermore, about 70% of global resources are used in cities. So it's absolutely critical from our point of view that when you have these massive sinks of consumption, there has to be circular economy principles and thinking embedded very much within the urban development agenda. So how cities work in terms of their metabolism, but also how they grow, has to take into account a circular approach. So again, going back to that nice sort of donut picture, we have to think of how cities can keep environmental boundaries at a global or even regional level within those boundaries, but also how do we maximize the sort of social welfare of people living within cities. I think on a more emotional level, people really relate to the cities that they live in. I know here in Amsterdam, people like to compare with other cities like Copenhagen or New York. There's always this friendly rivalry between, I'm sure, Calgary and Vancouver and Toronto. We're always comparing, and actually cities have a lot to do with our own personal identity and the identity of where we work and even our political institutions. So it's really a place that's quite fertile for change. People can really also sense change. So if you start up a pilot project in the center of town, tomorrow and it's successful, people will know about it. Whereas if it's the national government trying to move the policy needle, it's not really noticeable. People don't really get a sense of what it means for them in their own personal lives. So it's a way of really concentrating energy to bring about change in a more meaningful way for businesses, institutions, policy institutions, but also individuals. And that's really why we focus on cities. There's also a wealth of benefits that cities bring. So massive amounts of value creation when you look at economic figures, job creation. Obviously, I think that's a lot of the reason why people are moving into cities and out of rural environments, is that the economy is rapidly shifting away from primary and secondary activities and more towards tertiary services, for example. There's also the potential for way better air quality, global competitiveness, reduction in CO2, and reduced resource use. So there's a lot of potential that cities hold for change as well. And if cities get that right, there is a high potential for them to really set a sustainable model that can be replicated globally. So I think I'll just dive into now some best practices from cities around the world, and maybe just bringing you along a little bit in the way that we think about circular economy. We always work with what we call the 7 key elements. These are basically key sort of principles that you can hold in the back of your head when thinking about how can I change, and I'll come back to that later. But I'll just quickly run through them. These are prioritize regenerative resources, so things like renewable energy, designing for the future, so really thinking about not only designing products for today that will last for today, but also how they can maybe adapt for tomorrow and beyond, preserving what's already there, rethinking the business model. So again, like the lighting example, I don't necessarily need to sell you a light bulb, but I could sell you lighting. Incorporating digital technology, and that's a huge enabler of many different circular economy strategies. So being able to connect, just simply put, consumer and producer in a way that they have a dialogue, that's really fundamental in enabling how actual physical material loops can be closed. Using waste as a resource, so obviously when products are wasted or being sent to waste, there actually is a lot of sort of embodied value that you can make use of. And also collaborating to create joint value. So when you think about how global supply chains or even just communities are set up, there's a lot of ways that collaboration can be formed to create value that goes beyond what's currently created in the economy. So I'm going to go through each of these examples here, but just to keep in the back of your mind, these are the sort of 7 key principles that we always try to use when thinking about how to implement circular economy innovations. So starting off with the first, prioritizing regenerative resources. This is actually an example coming out of Amsterdam. There is a very small microbrewery that is now using rainwater, collecting rainwater all throughout the city. They have big rain barrels on some roofs. They truck that into their brewery. Obviously, that's put through a purification process. They get local resources and transform that into beer, and actually now gin as well. So that's one way of capturing resources that are all around us. But even if you imagine if you have your own garden at home, even capturing rainwater just for washing your car or gardening, that makes a lot more sense than using drinking water, which has been purified and brought to way too high of a standard than the function actually calls for. So that's one example of actually how you can prioritize resources that are kind of already passing around you. Also looking at textiles. So Obviously, agricultural activities are sort of omnipresent. They're usually surrounding most cities. And agricultural residues or even byproducts like manure from livestock farms, these can actually be harvested and produced into high-value materials like textiles. So this company, Mestic, is now producing bioplastic and cellulose fibers from agricultural wastes and manures. So this is something that is really interesting because oftentimes these agricultural byproducts like manure are just spread back on the field, and there's nothing wrong with that. But where there is an opportunity to create a higher value product, this is one example of how that could look, how you could create value from resources that are regenerative. Preserving and extending what's already made. This is actually something that's picking up quite a lot in Europe. So I was actually just in Switzerland doing an industry workshop with a lot of different repair cafes and creative industry entrepreneurs and small companies. Usually secondhand shops kind of have not necessarily the best image, not really the best appeal. They're usually small stores kind of hidden away. But by bringing them together and really facilitating education and more creative activities, actually you can create a shopping center where you really bring together a lot of these skills and expertise and technology to really make a great concept. So this is an example coming out of Sweden where they've managed to do that. It's been a huge success. It's a really trendy place to go, but it's also a place where you can learn a lot. You can take courses, even just how to repair clothing or repair electronics. And the interesting thing about this example is that it's co-located with a sort of drop-off recycling facility. So you can show up with an old chair in the back of your car, drop it off, and this shopping center will pick it up and improve and extend the life of that chair. Also, when you look at sort of capital-intensive equipment, so this is an MRI machine, and this is something that the company Philips is doing a lot with, is how do we actually invest in more intense repair and remanufacturing and even refurbishment activities rather than just pure production and sending that through to waste management. So this is really taking off here in the Netherlands, and there's even some car manufacturing facilities in France where actually they're taking a lot of sort of common drivetrain equipment and refurbishing that. And that's way more cost effective and way more efficient for them to refurbish rather than just to fully manufacture from scratch. Obviously that carries with it enormous environmental gains because you're not extracting raw metals back from the earth, but you're actually just keeping those things in cycle for longer. So using waste as a resource, here's another example of a Dutch company. Actually, I just realized now that the text here on the bottom isn't correct. It's actually a soap manufacturing company that uses food scraps or food waste like coffee grounds or orange peels in their production process, in their local production process to make things like soap. I think even the company Lush does a lot of this activity themselves. So I think this is a really great practical example of how you could incorporate what would otherwise be a waste resource back into a valuable product. I'm sure you've probably heard of this example here where we're talking about the company Adidas taking old fishing nets collected from the ocean, collecting them, treating them, and putting that back into their manufacturing process to produce footwear. And that's happening a lot where, again, you have a lot of sort of residual plastics, not only from sort of the sea or marine sources, but even just locally being picked up and incorporated back into the manufacturing process. rather than extracting from virgin sources. I think rethinking the business model is actually one of the more interesting ones. It's not so much how the product is designed or created, but actually how the whole service is delivered to the customer. So I was talking about lighting as a service. This is actually one tangible example where Amsterdam airport, probably one of the bigger airports in Europe, has now completely procured its lighting as a service from the company Philips. So what they pay for is the hours of light and not the light bulbs themselves. And what that means for them practically in terms of savings is they now have probably the highest efficiency bulbs and lighting fixtures available. So that also brings their electricity bill down significantly. Maintenance is now included within the service contract. So you can imagine for a huge facility like an airport, that's a huge, huge benefit. And the lighting after its use phase can also be passed on to other forms of street lighting or office lighting or other functions. And then finally repaired and remanufactured when it needs to be passed on to other functions. The Swedish company IKEA is also now beginning to lease their furniture, which is really interesting, especially when you think for sort of first-time home buyers or students who just need to furnish their residence for a couple of years. It actually makes a lot more sense than sort of buying expensive furniture and lugging that around, especially when you're moving a lot or highly mobile. Designing for the future is an interesting one, especially when you think about complex products like mobile phones. So currently, it's quite difficult in many cases to sort of crack open your phone or your television or anything there. But actually having a more modular design could enable you to not only repair your phone, but even upgrade it. So you could upgrade your screen to a higher resolution one, or if you're an avid photographer, you could install a bigger camera or a larger battery, which would satisfy a lot of people. But that's something actually that the Dutch company Fairphone is really looking into, and also trying to do that in an ethical way where those raw metals are actually coming from fair and ethical mines and not from conflict mines. If you look at buildings, that's also a way that you can think about designing for the future. So actually designing, let's say, more modular, or more buildings with more of a flexible skeleton. So where now this concept, which is called super lofts, can be configured to be many small apartments. You could imagine combining 2 or 3 apartments to be a family house, or you could shift it all together to be an office building, or even a recreation center or a school. It has many different functions, and they've designed it in a way that can be highly adaptable as the needs shift and as the urban fabric shifts. Incorporating digital technology is a key one. So as I was saying, let's say you have some food that's still edible, still usable, but you aren't connected. There are a lot of apps and a lot of sort of ICT services that can actually help facilitate those transactions in a way that you couldn't really do before. So this example here is actually a professional tool for restaurants and hotels and catering companies to actually help them, in one hand, procure food in a better way, understand what's in their inventory, and maybe give them suggestions on how they could prepare meals such that they could minimize food waste. But if there is food waste, they're able to also connect to people who can utilize it, like soup kitchens or even other restaurant concepts that base a lot of their menu options off of recovered food. This is a really interesting one from the context of the city as well. So now you have a lot of, let's say, optical scanners or all sorts of different scanners, connected to machine learning algorithms. So these optical scanners combined with machine learning can actually understand what they're seeing. So in this case here, this is a textile sorting machine, and our colleagues actually work quite closely with this technology. But this is actually able to sort out the different blends and the different colors of textiles such that they can be sorted and recycled to the best possible way. There are also a number of examples, and I'm happy to talk about that later, where you even have sort of common municipal recycling bins on street corners that are able to scan what's in the bag and sort that to a sort of basic degree within the bin itself. So I think this is actually advancing in a way that's really exciting. And I think we'll see a lot more going into the future, especially within the city space. Just quickly, because I'm a little bit concerned on time, collaborating to create joint value. A lot of times you have sort of big industry parks where you have a lot of manufacturing capacity, but due to the fact that businesses don't necessarily talk to the adjacent businesses within that park, there isn't really a sense of where, let's say, symbiosis could take place. So where one person's waste, one company's waste could actually be a valuable input for my production process. Just one simple example here, there was the case of Heinz making, well, ketchup among other food products. Obviously, they have a whole bunch of byproducts, so residues, skins, or seeds, or peels coming out, and they didn't really have a high value use for it. Ford decided to investigate to what extent bioplastics could replace sort of petroleum-based plastics in their car components, and they began looking for agricultural residue suppliers like Heinz to begin to create those products within their plant. And that was one way of sort of forming a new collaboration where there isn't actually an established relationship, and actually both companies would benefit from that mutual symbiosis. So what does all this mean? Obviously, these are quite loose examples, just looking at what's happening in the world of circular economy. I think if we zoom out and look at, if taken all together, what could this bring our economy? You know, circular economy still on one hand is quite young. It's only been around less than a decade. So there have only been a few studies really looking into what could be the macroeconomic effects, but actually one of the main studies has looked at what this could mean for Europe, the European Union. There are some key findings here. So they saw that there could be a net increase of jobs of about 700,000 by 2030, which is only about 10 years away. So I think that's quite impressive already. I think more impressive is the amount of carbon reduction that could happen by 2050. So 296 million tons. That's quite a lot. But also looking at the pure economic, the euro benefit, 1.8 trillion by 2030 is also quite a resounding figure. So taken all together, I think what you can conclude is that these aren't just fun and quirky examples, but actually taken together and implemented in a more systematic way that really makes sense, you do have social, environmental, and economic benefits accruing into something that's actually quite meaningful. So we're quite hopeful that actually by implementing circular economy, starting with cities, this can actually build up the momentum, and actually we can begin to see over the next 5 years or the next decades some serious numbers on the social, environmental, and economic side. So I think at this point I'll switch over to Jordi, and I think what he's going to introduce is a little bit more of what cities are doing, just looking more specifically at the cities of Amsterdam and Glasgow.
Correct, but before starting, because we have spent already almost the whole hour, I would like to ask you if you would like me to just go for maybe 20 more minutes, half an hour, to explain you the cases of Amsterdam and Glasgow, or you would rather prefer to just maybe start asking questions and I don't know, get started with the discussion? That's an open question, so whatever you prefer, we will just probably there.
Yeah. I'll just pull up the chat now.
Yes, just let us know.
Okay.
So first feedback is that you would love to hear about the cities.
Okay.
Okay, I will try. Okay.
Cool.
I will try to go then. Sorry for taking a bit of your time for the discussion, but we will have the time. I will try to go as fast as I can. So yes, as Matthew introduced at the beginning, the cases of Amsterdam and Glasgow are very interesting. And we have worked with them for a long time, since 2015 with both. And the origin of our work with them in both cases was the city, the CircularCities scan, which is one of the, as Matthew said, one of the main services that we provide. And then Matthew has explained all these case studies, best practices, really specific examples that are super inspiring. But then from a more public sector point of view, it's kind of hard to you might wonder, how do I get started? How do we go about it as a city, as a municipality, as a city official, or a waste management organization? How do I get started? So as Matthew said, Amsterdam is more a policy-oriented approach with the policy making. So the outcome of the scan was more creating policy programs that have an influence on the economy and the society, and Glasgow was a more business innovation approach. So starting off with Amsterdam. So Amsterdam, as Matthew said, is one of the most innovative cities in the world. Actually, a few days ago, I just read the last research from JLL pointing that Amsterdam is the 19th most innovative city in the world, and probably one of, if not the most innovative city in Europe. And if you talk about circular economy, it's definitely one of the main front runners in worldwide. And as you can see here with Amsterdam, since 2015, we have developed, not us together with them, but helping them in 73 pilot projects in the last 3 years. And this only counts up to 2017. So probably now the figure is even greater. And to give you a bit of context about Amsterdam, I think it's important to just share with you that Amsterdam is also in a inside quite a unique country, which is the Netherlands, that has the ambition to be 100% circular economy country by 2050. Which, if you think about it, it's crazy. It's very ambitious. And how do they plan to do it? Well, 50% reduction in the use of primary raw materials by 2030. And then they have set some transition agendas on the main value chain, biomass and food, plastics, manufacturing, construction, and consumer goods. And if you think about it, they are pretty cross-cutting, and they kind of take almost the whole economy. But this is a very, I think it's very inspiring, but at the same time, you might wonder, okay, this goal, this target is very, it's very interesting, but how are they going to do it? How do they envision this 100% circular country? They probably don't have a clear answer about that. And this is actually what is interesting about it, because the Dutch culture and the approach from Amsterdam and the Netherlands, they are very ambitious, they are very good in sustainability, and they perform really well. And they work like setting very ambitious goals, and then they have this approach of learning by doing. And then they really are hands-on, they have a really hands-on approach, and they just get started. And a clear example is the 73 pilot projects that I just mentioned at the beginning, that you can now see here in this matrix that we actually built together with the gemeente, the municipality of Amsterdam, that shows all these pilot projects that we just started testing. Pilot project is a way to just lower the risk in testing some business models, new innovations, new ideas. And if they work, you just scale them up. So all these 73 pilot projects were implemented and evaluated. And the ones that were actually working, and some of them are the examples that Matthew already introduced, have been scaled up and are now probably being implemented in the whole country, or even they have they are thinking about implementing them in the whole Europe. Here, what is interesting in this matrix is that in the left side, in the rows, you can see the different policy instruments, because as I said, Amsterdam is a more policy-oriented approach towards shifting towards a circular economy. You can see the different policy instruments, which are land issue, spatial planning, procurement, which is, I think, a very interesting topic, education and information provision, research, networking and information exchange, legislation and regulations. I think this point is also very important, and then business and financial support. And then in the different columns, you can see the value chains that I just previously mentioned as the transition agendas. And then here you can see plotted all the different pilot projects that have been evaluated throughout these last 3 years. So as it is impossible for me to just explain you all the different tools, I just selected maybe 2 examples that are very inspiring, I think, and very interesting, and that also connect very well with the Amsterdam approach. That I'm pretty sure, I'm from Barcelona, and I think that this approach could very well be replicated in other regions. I think it's a very nice approach, which is very bottom up, and also having into account that the knowledge and the innovation is not in the public sector. So it's not a top-down approach. They just think, okay, the civil society, the small businesses, SMEs, multinationals too, the innovators, entrepreneurs, they are the ones that have the knowledge, that have this knowledge and the innovation power. Therefore, we, us, as municipality or as national government, we have to facilitate this innovation and these new businesses and startups. And this is the point of this slide, which is the new instruments, which are experimental space and regulation-free zones. Okay, so this is the idea of bottom-up approach. And here in this visual, in this infographic, you can just see it's kind of an infographic of Amsterdam, and then you can see as in throughout the city, you might have a power-to-protein plant, then also resources program from the Amsterdam metropolitan area, then waste to aromatics, cross-chain control. These are just examples that can happen in the city, but it's just the idea of just giving room and space for innovation in the city by experimental space and regulation-free zones. And 2 very more pragmatic examples are, on the one hand, the Port of Amsterdam, which is has also the ambition to be one of the first circular ports in the world, and being a circular hub. And actually, maybe Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2018 they started developing this this on-site plastic recycling plant in the port itself, to start recycling on-site the plastic that is going around the port, because obviously it's an area where it just passes around a lot of materials, products, imports, exports, etc. So it's a really hot area in a city. And the second example, which is also very interesting, and comes together with this idea of Amsterdam as a living lab, they call it a living lab, is the music festivals. And because as you know, well, you might not know, but Amsterdam and the Netherlands is very well known because of the amount of festivals, music festivals, that are around more than 100 per year. In Amsterdam, and the interesting fact of these music festivals is that they are just small-scale cities. There you can find provision of food, beverages, and you need all the services as energy, water. You have the different you have bathrooms. You have a lot of movement of people, thousands of people going to the festival. So it's a small-scale city. And again, this is a place where you can experiment and try new innovations, and just invite entrepreneurs to just do test the innovations and new ideas and business models. And if they work, you can then scale them up into the city. So this is very interesting. And a very nice example is the Digital Festival, DGTL. You can check their website, which is a very, very nice festival that actually has the ambition to become, but in 2 years' time, the first 100% circular festival in the world. And for instance, just a practical example again, they use an eco-coin. An eco-coin being just rewarding for having sustainable behavior. Therefore, if I'm just buying my drink, a beer, at the bar, and then I just give back my plastic glass to them so that they can reuse it or recycle it, I get this cryptocurrency EcoCoin, and with this cryptocurrency I get discounts and I get just rewards. And in my case, I went to the digital festival in Amsterdam. I obviously behaved really well, and for that I received EcoCoins, and with one of the EcoCoins, for instance, I got a free ticket for the digital festival in Barcelona. Therefore, they are incentivizing me to have this sustainable behavior. And turning to a different example, but also I think very interesting, this is more regarding procurement, public procurement. But if you think about it, it's a very smart way of thinking of public procurement, because this is about the Amsterdam Startup in Residence program, which is basically a collaboration between the municipality of Amsterdam and the startups and entrepreneurs and innovators in Amsterdam. And basically what it tries to do, because obviously you can invest directly into businesses, you can create these subsidies and programs, but this many times doesn't work. Therefore, they thought that maybe it's better that we create this program that actually what it does is it provides to startups in Amsterdam, but also international startups, the possibility of work in-house the municipality for 4 months, which means to just give them and provide them with a space where they can work, plus have access to the municipality network, therefore potential partners, potential clients, suppliers, etc. And training for different trainings, some knowledge training oriented, also soft skills. And also they provide them with some mentoring and coaching. And then if after these 4 months of in-house work, they are able to come up with a viable business model, the municipality is promises to buy in and therefore become the launching customer and invest in the idea so that they can scale it up. And if you think about it, it's just a win-win for the city itself, because this is a model that has obviously a social benefit, and also an economical benefit and also environmental benefit for the city, but also is good for the innovators that they can scale up a good business model. And this not only happens for circular economy. At the bottom of the slide, you can see circular economy, vibrant city, mobility, healthy city. There are around 20 key issues that are tackled, but one of them, and one of the most successful ones, is circular economy. And then here I have some pilot projects that actually are part of these 73 pilot projects that I explained before, and actually come from our work that we did together with the municipality. Well, I will go quickly through them, because the first one is the city port area of Amsterdam that I already explained. So the development of a business and innovation hub with excellent connections to the material throughout associated with the Port of Amsterdam. The second one is very interesting, which is the restaurant in stock. Restaurant offering full menu based on using unsold products. A lot of supermarkets, big supermarket chain in the Netherlands and throughout the world, they many times just discard some food that actually is completely eatable, and it becomes just food waste when it could be perfectly used to cook very nice meals for people that might need it. And this restaurant actually, as it says in the description, InStock collects unsold products from local supermarkets and other producers and offers a full circular menu. And if you ever come to Amsterdam, I really recommend you to visit this restaurant. It's actually really good. Another example is circular tendering. This is more regarding urban planning and construction. There are some, these are just names of neighborhoods in Amsterdam districts. And I think the most relevant one is Buikslotterham, which is practically the first almost fully circular economy neighborhood. And again, as I told you before, with a really bottom-up approach in the urban planning of this neighborhood, in all the facilities that it provides, services, etc. The citizens were always included in the process, and they helped designing this neighborhood. And two last examples. The one of the reindeer, the last one, Matthew already explained this example. And another example that is very interesting is a 3D printing with plastic waste. Like, super simply put, is just 3D printed public furniture made of plastic waste that is collected by the citizens, who actually get a reward for every full bag of plastic waste that they just give. Therefore, it's a completely closed loop. And actually citizens are being incentivized to recycle plastic, and then you are bringing them back this effort by just providing them with very nice furniture made of 3D printed public with plastic waste. And actually the reward is as for the festival, that the example that I gave you is this reward is just for discounts in local shops, in local supermarkets, restaurants, etc. for discounts. So therefore, it's a closed loop that actually also creates community, and all the benefits are actually felt by all the community in that specific neighborhood. And then now, I think it's time to move to Glasgow. As I already said, and Matthew also, it's more a business-oriented and business innovation process. So instead of focusing more on the policy-making side, it's more about business innovation. So in this case, it was the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce who was our main contact, and this is why it was most business-oriented, because there was a big network of businesses that were very interested in the circular economy. And throughout the process, over 10 pilot projects in 1 year were implemented. And here I have the three kind of highlights, like the main pilot project that came from this process of actually making a business canvas of the business models to understand. We had them to understand what is a circular economy and how the circular economy could integrate in the business models in order to have circular business models. And then after that, once we created this knowledge and awareness, we started making it more practical and developing these circular pilot projects that we could then develop, which are mainly these three ones. Coffee to compost, as a result of a circular economy workshop. So it was about the connection. Waste coffee ground of the food outlets are now used as a fertilizer for the plants in the center. So as you see, we also have making the connections between supplier and a potential client, so that some waste can be reused in order to create another business model and create this circular value chain. The same again for the beer, a beer example where a local brewer has created a beer from waste bread. So again, we have this connection. And finally, 3 pilot projects for a circular conference center that actually were strategies that were crowdsourced for Scotland's largest conference center, the SEC, with commitment to implement these strategies. So as you see, also from the business innovation point of view, it's possible to also get started and start implementing very specific pilot projects.
Cool.
And now here, I think Matthew, you can.
Yeah, so I think definitely in mind of time, I want to have enough room for you guys to answer ask your questions, but I'll just leave you with a couple slides. So obviously, what can you guys do? So how do we sort of take the essence of the lessons and the examples? I mean, the first thing that I would say is really, what's your starting point? So, I mean, what are you in control of? What is your sphere of influence? Is it something small like your grocery list, or managing your own home, your household? What can you do within maybe the context of your work? Looking a little bit bigger, or even bigger still, looking at the extent to which you can influence your government or the political discussion within your community. So I think it matters a lot about what your starting point is, and I think that's a question with an answer unique to each individual. I think there's more than enough great examples to be found online. So just keeping in mind those 7 key elements, and looking through all the examples that you can find online of what other cities are doing or other companies are doing, that's a lot of inspiration out there. But maybe also just thinking or bringing in a little bit of systems thinking theory. This is a tool that we often use to help cities try to understand where can you really have high leverage. So where can you put a little bit of effort and have a high return on that investment? So obviously changing a whole system is extremely complicated and not fast. And there are different ways that you can intervene in that system that can begin to change that balance, or at least begin to have incremental effects. So looking closer to the fulcrum of this teeter-totter here, you have things like materials. So altering how materials flow in the system. That's quite easy to change. So you can substitute materials, so petroleum plastics for bioplastics, but it's not going to change the whole system overnight. It's relatively ineffective. If you look a little bit bigger, a little bit further along, you can think about how the processes within the system could be changed. So how to maybe change feedback loops, incentives or tax schemes. Somewhat easy to change, obviously not something that can happen overnight, and also getting a little bit more close to being effective, because you're reaching a greater number of people by how these processes work. Further along still, looking fundamentally at design, you can really redefine goals, distribution of power, rules. Obviously, we're now getting a little bit more abstract in the meaning here, and I'll give some examples in a moment. But now we're getting into the realm of really changing how the system works fundamentally. And even further along still, way out there is the vision. So what is the purpose? What are the values and the paradigms and the mindsets of the system itself? So this is very, very difficult to change. It takes many, many decades. But also really effective when it does. So, you know, I think Canada in general is quite progressive on its ideas towards climate change. You can see how things really tip over once you have a sort of critical momentum, and the paradigm, the values begin to change really quickly once you have a bit of a tipping point there. But maybe just to make it a little bit more tangible, to go through again from left to right, looking at materials. You could think about removing paper coffee cups from your offices and replacing that with ceramic mugs. You could increase the number of recycling collection points in town to make it easier for people. Or you could even think about how you could use services like the postal service that are sort of always going around the city to also act as a logistics channel for waste, so like e-waste, for example. The next one, you could look at behavioral incentives or disincentives, like hiding cigarettes in stores. I know that's something that's happened now in Canada. But you could also look at a variety of different subsidies and taxes that would encourage different behavior. And I think that has quite a lot of power to more fundamentally nudge, I would say, people's behavior in everyday life. But it gets them more accustomed to new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things. I think moving further along, looking at how the system is designed, and I think it's good to have a few examples here because it is quite abstract. Think about annual reporting and KPIs. So, for instance, having circularity indicators at a city level. This is something that they're doing in Switzerland, and it allows them to understand, you know, what is the metabolism of the city? Where are materials flowing, and how is that changing year from year? You know, understanding how the system is designed can also be applied in adjusting bylaws. So Jordi was talking a lot about how the municipality sort of allowed for a lot of experimentation by essentially ignoring certain laws for, you know, the need to have sewage connection or the need for how energy systems need to look. If you allow, for instance, for fully off-grid solutions to develop and pop up in a city, that actually can give rise to a lot more of alternative solutions, and even furthermore, just the space for greater innovation. Last one would be quite abstract, but, you know, obviously we like to measure progress in terms of GDP. But what if we look beyond GDP and go back to that nice donut picture that I was mentioning way back in the beginning? How, you know, what if we begin to measure progress by how well we're doing by keeping ourselves within that environmental, within the planetary boundaries, but also by how well we're maximizing the social the social foundation. In many ways, that's a real paradigm shift that would get people to rethink the whole notion of progress itself. So I think with that, I'd like to move on and just open this up for discussion. So what I will do is get back to the Q&A. So I think if everybody opens up the Q&A tab here, we can see them, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have. Any questions that you have right now at the moment. But curious also to hear how you thought the presentation went, and I'll hand it over to you guys. So feel free to write your questions in the little Q&A box there. Okay, so Jani asked the question, could you please expand on the regulation-free zones? I can give one example of here in Amsterdam. There was a little polluted sort of former shipping yard. It had a lot of heavy metals and other toxins in the soil. The municipality didn't know what to do with it, and it would be very, very expensive to essentially dig out all the, the 2 or 3 meters that you would need to haul out. And they were looking for alternative solutions. So a consortium of creative companies came together, and they said, well, there's a lot of research looking at how specific types of plants can actually remediate soil, but it would take 10 or 15 years to do that. But in the meantime, what if we were to put houseboats, old houseboats that are, in Amsterdam, there are tons of canals. So what if we took a lot of those sort of defunct houseboats, brought them out of the water, plopped them on land, grew plants, remediated the soil, and actually turned this into a big living lab where everything was fully circular. And now that place is called De Kovel. It's in Amsterdam, and it's probably one of the biggest tourist attractions in the city in the past 3 or 4 years. So really, really interesting what's happening. And what the municipality did there was they said, go nuts, fully explore the circular economy concept, just show that you can meet the same standards, the same equivalency standards that we would otherwise hold a new area or a new neighborhood to. So for example, just tangibly, there's no sewage connection. Everything is treated on site, but there's regular testing that goes on to make sure that the wastewater is treated either the same or better than the traditional sewage infrastructure.
Yes, and another example could be the music festival, where obviously there is more flexibility regarding regulation, and they give them room to test and new ideas, eco toilets, this cryptocurrency, reusing all the biomass that is generated in order to create fertilizers, etc. So also the festival is a good example of this. And actually, I think someone was asking for the link, Mara Pratt. So I will just type here the link, and Matthew, if you want to continue answering questions.
So Amy Reynolds asked the question, have you heard of any cities successfully using plastic waste in their road asphalt? Yes, there are many Dutch examples of this, actually. One of the more interesting ones that I think is being implemented now is they're developing these sort of modular, almost like Lego blocks. So you can imagine it's sort of a very thin block. It's maybe, 2 foot deep by maybe 10 foot wide, and it's a bike path that you can sort of stack together like Lego blocks. But so it has a surface which is plastic, but underneath, actually, they incorporate a lot of the cavities for rainwater collection, for electricity lines, and other things that you would typically dig and include in road infrastructure. And what that allows them to do is actually lay down these modular blocks when a road needs to be repaired, and they can if there's anything wrong with the sewage or the rainwater, the drainage, the electricity, you can quickly pull one out, do a repair, and within half an hour or an hour, just replace it back. And that's a really interesting way of incorporating plastic. But I think there's a lot of other examples where waste plastic is being used in asphalt construction. The only downside that I would see to that is that, like I was saying with the example of textiles, we generally want to steer away from creating these sort of monster materials where you're blending all kinds of different polymers and different chemicals together into a sort of single material that's almost impossible, again, to recycle or do anything with. So while there are good examples of waste plastic being used in road construction, I wouldn't necessarily condone the creation of these sort of monster materials where it's great that it's created and that you've used a waste resource, but actually for the rest of its life, you can't do anything again.
Regarding this question from Alison Abing, maybe we could...
Yeah, so I think we're actually working towards working with some Canadian municipalities in the future. I can't really comment on that now because we're still in negotiations, but yeah, we're coming to Canada. So that's exciting. Peter Duck asks, well, nice presentation. Elephant in the room. Circular economy will need to proceed hand in hand with alternate economic models, alternatives to the paradigm of continued growth, which drives the current economics and requires increasing energy inputs. Maybe slower, but always increasing. Are you hearing discussions about steady state economics or ecological economics? Yeah, so that's something, and feel free to jump in. That's a huge discussion, I would say, in the sustainability world in general. I think circular economy can certainly sort of slow things down. So if you imagine like the examples that we're talking about, where materials are being cycled within the economy for longer, you could imagine that could, let's say, slow growth, but also it would optimize the social and environmental sphere. I think the way that we like to think about it is actually the donut economics approach. So, and that's actually some work that we're doing with Amsterdam right now, and I think there's even some reports just being recently published. But yeah, fundamentally, we see circular economy as a means to an end. It's all about how do we maximize basically livelihoods for as many people as possible, while also really operating within the ecological boundary. I think, in my opinion, if we can nail that, we've really credibly answered how we can come up with an alternate to growth, or the sort of GDP growth reference.
Yeah, and actually about this topic of growth, Peter, also it's very interesting to think about if instead of using GDP, you would start using human well-being as an indicator. This would completely change our mindset and also what we understand as the economy currently. So actually, this is also something that I invite you to explore, and is also very well connected to the donut economics topic.
So Ben asks, circular economy is often approached from the perspective of waste management or waste practitioners. Who are the other key allies in municipalities to gain support? Yeah, difficult to say. I mean, I think the way that we work within our city scan is we try to bring the key decision makers in the room, and that tends to be waste management because they're sort of have their hands dirty, so to speak, in the topic, but also looking at innovation departments. We look at sustainability departments, even procurement or employment departments. We really try to bring as many people along in that journey right from the beginning as possible. You know, whether you're talking about a municipality or a company, it's just the case that people work in silos. So actually just breaking down those walls and getting people to understand what the circular economy is, speak the same language, and realize where there are shared incentives and where collaboration could occur. That's in many ways the breakthrough that we try to bring when we do a scan. But I think there's no sort of clear hero that we need to sort of onboard, but it's actually getting the right decision makers at the right levels in the room, and bringing them along in this process.
I think the question from Jeff Linton is very interesting. It actually says, in today's busy world, we make many of our purchases, fast food, cars, etc., based on convenience. Can you speak to any experience you have had in overcoming this aspect of participation to achieve buy-in or increase participation? Yeah, Matthew, I'm sure that he can say many things about it, but also I did some research regarding, if I understood correctly your question, like how to incentivize people, how to get citizens on board, how to overcome this barrier of convenience. I mean, we are really used to that our life and our consumption and this overconsumption is very easy. There are many ways to go. But one of them, obviously, it's sometimes just this reward scheme that I talked about, the rewarding for recycling, for sustainable behavior. But yeah, many times research has shown that not always works. And rewarding for recycling, for instance, if you are already engaged and you are eco-friendly, if you are rewarding it, probably the effect could even be the contrary. You are disincentivizing me to do it. But many times it's just to make it as easy as possible for the citizen to just behave as you wish, either by nudging them or either by, for instance, there are some municipalities like, for instance, Lausanne in Switzerland, or some municipalities in Catalonia in Spain, that they have this door-to-door waste collection system, which actually it's kind of the easiest way that the citizen have to just recycle, by just bringing the waste bags and recycle bags already separated in the front door, so that the electric truck just collects it door-to-door. So many times the best way to go is to just make our lives as easy as possible. And also other smart solutions, as Matthew said, like rethink the business model. In Barcelona, there are many electric sharing motorcycles, which actually serve a lot the purpose, because it makes your life super easy. You don't have to own a motorcycle, because in Barcelona, if you have ever been, it's super common to go by motorcycle. But then those are electric motorcycles that are super easy to access, quite cheap. And you don't own them, you just use them and you pay per minute. And they are throughout the city, and it works super well. So I think these different initiatives actually work pretty well to actually overcome this barrier of engaging with citizens and businesses sometimes too.
Yeah. And then we have a question from Etienne, who actually I was recently in contact with over email. So hello, Etienne. Are the 15 cities linked through a network or community of practice? So that's been an evolving story since we've been started. So obviously we're based in Amsterdam. We've worked a lot with Dutch cities in the beginning. Now we're actually beginning, now that we have a few cities under our belt, actually to create more formalized networks and global hubs actually. So as we move forward, the role that we see for ourselves is actually creating more networks and actually helping local experts help themselves, and actually providing tools and techniques and training, and really trying to see how we can transfer a lot of the sort of early learnings that we've experienced here and applying that to practitioners that are around the world. And then Tammy asks, how can we encourage manufacturers to buy into the circular economy and not contribute with planned obsolescence? Good question. Yeah, I think one thing is looking at aligning incentives. So, for example, from what I know, the aircraft industry. So, from a normal citizen's perspective, the top criteria for flying is safety. We all want the safest planes. As far as I know, both the tires, the tires for the planes, but also the engines, they're not sold as a product, but they're actually sold as a service. So from a manufacturing point of view, what I'm selling you is hours of either landings or runtime or whatever. And I want to optimize that because I want to just offer you the best service contract. You as the purchaser, you as the airplane company, obviously want that as well, because included in that would be maintenance. I know that I'm designing. I know that you're designing it for the longest possible length and the highest possible quality. And we can see that this sort of product as a service model has definitely taken off in many different industries. So we mentioned lighting now a bunch of times, the aircraft industry, even jeans. So for instance, like clothing. And I think a lot of that just has to do with reevaluating the incentives. So for example, me personally, I don't necessarily like to go, I think like most men actually, don't really like to go shopping for clothes. I don't really care, but I would be happy just to say, you know, I like this sort of style, and send me something every 6 months and I'll return my old stuff in the mail. And as long as you can kind of provide me with that, the incentives are aligned. And that sort of transaction allows you as a manufacturer or as a clothing retailer to treat those clothes in the best possible way. So either through resale or through repair and remanufacturing. But yeah, I think globally, I think that actually is one of probably the bigger hurdles.
Yeah. And just a short note, like regarding also planned obsolescence, one of the key sectors is regarding smartphones, for instance, where this problem is a very hot topic there with iPhone and these big players, Huawei, Samsung, that everyone is pointing at them regarding planned obsolescence. But then you could take maybe the example of Fairphone, and Fairphone is a social organization, social company from Amsterdam actually, and that they do modular phones, circular phones that they are actually planned to last as much as possible. And actually they are testing this model that Matthew has already talked a lot about it, which is Fairphone as a service. Therefore, the incentive for the manufacturer is that the product itself lasts as much as possible in order to just redo this contract of leasing or product as a service.
Yeah. So Amy asks again, what are your thoughts on cities and provinces working together to procure more sustainable packaging options? Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the, it's not the most sort of sexy examples to talk about, but yeah, procurement, the process in which you buy things and contract other companies to produce those things for you is actually one of probably the more powerful things that cities can do. And if you can, let's say, agree on even just provincial or municipal or regional standards for how that works, or go through larger orders, that's certainly something where a lot of improvement can happen. Again, from a sort of systems thinking point of view, because this is also an example that we were just trying out in Switzerland, you want to make sure that let's say I'm, instead of buying straws, plastic straws, because this is a hot topic, I buy bioplastic straws. I also want to make sure that those bioplastic straws are, once consumed or once used by the user, that they're actually going to the right place and can be treated properly. So I think I would certainly say that look, in terms of the scope of how to bring collaboration between municipalities and provinces, that should certainly be one critical dimension of the scope around procurement, but also look at the other dimension of once you buy in these products, ensure that they can keep flowing through in the best possible way to be recycled back. One good example of that is actually writing in criteria for the producer to pick things up. So what we are now exploring in Switzerland is for all fast food vendors in the city, could they collectively buy into compostable trays and vessels, but also ensuring that you would work in a consortium so that those things are collected properly in the right bins, sorted, cleaned, and prepared, in essence, to be reused for the maximum number of times.
Just a quick note, like Jody, you're asking a question in the chat that what are the biggest barrier to regulations that get in the way of a circular economy approach? Like really, like a super easy example is our regulation is mainly talking about waste. What would happen if we would start talking about raw materials or resources instead of waste? If you think about it, this small change would actually have a big influence in our system and how the different value chains and the ways of treating waste will actually change very much.
Yeah. Okay, we have a few more. So, budget is a major concern, I suppose, for municipal governments. How can you sell these kinds of innovative ideas as being financially worthwhile for governments to support with capital? So yeah, I think yeah, sure. So price tag. How does circular economy make financial sense? I think actually looking at how you can do things better by recovering value at the end of life is a huge plus. So it's not necessarily new forms of revenue, but mostly in cost savings by having something more valuable or prepared to be valuable at the end of life and making that cycle complete. And there's many good examples of that, but I think, well, just looking at the total cost of ownership, for example, through the lighting example in the airport, it's a key one. So through aligning incentives in the proper way through lighting as a service, Philips now, the lighting company, is incentivized to put in their maximum efficiency bulbs because they're selling you the service. So in terms of the overall efficiency, I think it works a lot better, and you can charge a lower price. So, for example, another example there, which is maybe a little bit clearer, is Elon Musk's company, SolarCity. So what he will say is, and I think that's still the business model, is whatever you're paying now, let's call it $100 a month for power, I'll charge you 10% less. So that's an immediate savings for you. I'll install the solar panels on your roof, and you don't have to worry about maintenance or anything. So you're realizing real savings. That company is now creating a grid that has benefits for them as now a micro network provider. And also they're able to run their business profitably under that model. So including maintenance and upgrades and so on. So I think the devil is in the details, but there are many good examples there to draw on. So Leah asks, circular economy seems to address products that have already entered the system and the role of prevention and reduction.
I think this is one of the, it's a very good question, and actually it's one of the, because actually if you see any of our reports, the MFAs that we are drawing, we are already thinking about how we could innovate with them, in the sense that we are many times talking about how we can react to what we have already done wrong. So probably many products that have already entered the system. So what is the best treatment that we can give them? But the core of the circular economy is also actually about prevention and reduction of these products, production and waste generation. So you're absolutely right. And I mean, some examples, I think, for instance, in Bern, we are trying to develop a reuse, it was a shopping center, repair shopping center, in order to just extend the lifetime of the product. So just providing a shopping center for repair for the citizens, so that you can go there, just bring your product, your couch, your electronics or whatever, and you can repair it there. They just teach you how to do it, and you have a repair center. And also in Prague, we are developing a whole reuse a network of reuse hubs. Therefore, reuse hubs understood as places that, they were probably just waste management, big facilities that they are being transformed into reuse hubs, where citizens, they can just swap products, they can just bring what they are not using anymore, so that other citizens, they can just reuse these electronics or any other products, so that we prevent and reduce this waste generation, and we just keep on reusing and capturing this value that is already there, so that we don't have to keep on producing products and actually generating waste.
Yeah,
that would be an example.
Yeah, and I think also just looking at, so Leah asks again, how do you have examples from cities that are on the smaller side?
I would just type a small example while you speak.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I can kind of answer both questions in one example. So let's just look at the community level. So you have a neighborhood, for example. Last year I just moved into a new house, and I had some small renovations to do. I mean, I can either buy a table saw, which is kind of that's what you would do in sort of normal society. But there are now apps where I can look at who's in my neighborhood that has a table saw. And if I pay them $5, can I rent it for half an hour or a day? That's in many ways actually preventing waste in the first place, because I don't really want to buy a table saw for $600 or $700. I just need to use it for half an hour to do my little project. And actually, if there's a network within my community, or small city in this case, that could actually be a much more interesting way and a much more effective way to both prevent and reduce waste, but actually bring together more of a local economy of sharing. So there are tons of apps here in the Netherlands and throughout Europe, and I'm sure there's also in Canada where you can do the same. I mean, just probably the more well-known example would be Uber. So it's I don't necessarily need to buy a car if I live in the city, but to have an Uber wherever I am, whenever I need it, that's the desired solution, and that actually, in a sense, prevents the waste after I were to buy an object like a car or a table saw. So Tammy asks here, has there been any interest in the circular economy concept from other countries such as Saudi Arabia, Africa, and Third World? Yes, that's something that we're working with now. We're not actively working, let's say, in the Third World, but certainly actually Saudi Arabia has quite some high sustainability ambitions. I think in Africa, just looking at the sort of economic structure, it's much more on sort of primary manufacturing or extraction. I mean, Africa is sort of the sort of resource basket of the world in many cases. And I think the question there is more focused on how do we do that in a more sustainable and ethical way. But again, with the focus on cycling resources locally within the urban context. We always try to view things from the city's perspective because that's really where we work, but I think you would have to look at the Third World more through the lens of production and less consumption per se.
Because actually, just a short note, actually, if you think about it, in Africa, in terms of consumption and behavior, they are probably more circular than we are in the West.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of irony in the circular economy in that, I'm sure everybody listening, that their parents or grandparents were living fundamentally in a more circular way. I know that my grandmother, for instance, never threw out string or aluminum foil. She would keep that stuff. And I think it's, in many ways, it's a sort of byproduct of the convenience lifestyle and the drive for greater convenience that we now dispose things so readily with no or very little consequence. So I think in many ways, and I think that maybe ties back up to a question asked earlier, even just kind of going back to simpler ways of living is, a really powerful and effective way of kind of inherently making your life more circular. I mean, even just composting organic food waste, making sure that goes back into your garden or sort of local park. I mean, that does make a difference.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think we've reached the bottom of the question and answer barrel, but if there are any more, we're still around to discuss. I'm just going to try to open up this again. Okay, well, oh yeah, great presentation. It will be a struggle to accomplish. Well, I think, as I said, we are really trying fundamentally to achieve systems change. And for sure, it is a struggle to accomplish. I think a good reason to hope and to have faith in the future actually is that there are a number of really tangible examples that are already happening today, and they're scaling effectively. This isn't really a flash in the pan, but actually this is a fire that's gaining more and more momentum as the years go on. So I think there is a lot of hope to be had by looking at front-running cities like here in Europe, and we're super excited to work more globally and share our insights and our tools and techniques with you guys in Canada and elsewhere.
But it's also interesting to just open up our mind and not be too narrow to very specific examples, because Airbnb could be a perfect example for a circular economy. Obviously having some specificities, but actually a circular economy basis, it's fundamentally about efficiency towards reaching some goals which are focusing to live in a more sustainable world and also more socially more engaged. So obviously Airbnb, then you get other issues, but fundamentally could be connected to the circular economy.
Yeah. So Alexander asks a super interesting question. So basically, composite materials are everywhere, and many of them have desirable properties. If you look in nature, many things are composite, yet readily recyclable. So how do we replicate living materials? I think that's actually one of the key questions about the circular economy. So our approach to material science has very much embraced composites from a production point of view, and obviously there are tremendous benefits. At the same time, there's a whole sort of other half of the economy which exists in nature but doesn't exist in the human context, which is how do you effectively sort of break down, extract the value, and cycle those components of the composite back into the economy. And I think actually I'm very, very excited by looking at the world of material science and looking at things like enzymes that are able to act as traditional, what traditional chemicals are doing currently, or even just looking at all kinds of examples through biomimicry. It's hugely inspiring, and I think I would expect a lot more emphasis now to be placed on sort of next generation material science, biotechnology, in order to bring about alternatives to what we have today. And I think in many ways it's a matter of time. So I really see a lot happening in that space. And yeah, super excited to see what unfolds in the coming years as well. Okay. Any other questions? I mean, feel free just to keep on typing them in. We're still around. I think we'll try to wrap this up in about 5 or 10 minutes. But yeah, keep asking questions if you have them. Or Christina and Lindsay, if you're there, feel free to jump in and ask questions that maybe you feel like we haven't touched on yet.
So it's Christina. I'm just going to jump in and basically let people know the next steps. So we are going to be contacting the core group of cities and communities that we have engaged in this project. And we'll be talking to you about what the next steps are, how we're going to work individually with you. And one of the things I'm really excited about is we're going to be trying to pair you up with a sister city in Europe, the cities essential that Circular Economy has worked with, that you can then get some direct mentoring from them as well. And we are going to be figuring out ways to continue our relationship with Circular Economy so that we can continue to build on their expertise. So we're quite excited, but we are in the initial stages of this. So if you have specific ideas for how you'd like to see this go forward, we'd love to hear them. Yeah, please keep engaged, and you will certainly be hearing from us, but we would love to hear from you as well. So I think just, I don't know, Matthew, can you maybe comment on the, that potential for sort of the peer-to-peer relationship? You kind of hinted at it in terms of you're talking about the hub and how you can bring some of these cities together. Yep. and how that can really jumpstart a city's journey to circularity.
Yeah, so actually, as I introduced in the beginning, so the cities team has only really been around for about 3 or 4 years, and we've largely worked with just a handful of cities, so 15 in a consulting model. So that's very much sort of me and Jordi going to a city, running a 9-month or a year-long process whereby we deliver pilot projects. I think now the volume and the level of sophistication of these pilot projects and business models and just successful case studies is at a point really where we're really looking to see how do we honestly take a step back and provide tools, techniques, training, ways of thinking, processes that actually help local change makers drive the agenda themselves. So what I'm personally working on is an exciting project that we hope to have launched in the coming years, is a sort of digital version of the city scan. So you working in the city could be able to log onto a website, understand some sort of basic metrics about your city, look at the material flows, have suggestions on what circular economy strategies could work for you, or even what other cities are like your city. I think creating a network of cities themselves that can understand what other cities are doing, what similarities they have in common, what challenges they may have in common, and linking that to specific individuals and even solution providers like consultants or policy developers or things like that. That's a huge step in terms of lifting the whole floor of circular economy, the circular economy agenda in the urban environment. So that's really one of the key ways that we're working on expanding this sort of network of cities. Alternatively, we're also working closely with global hubs, and that has a lot to do with really capacity building. So like training, what are the tools and techniques that local experts could begin to adopt and incorporate in their own work to facilitate workshops or more practical aspects that couldn't be covered in the digital space that we've learned, and how do we scale learning in a radical way in a global sense. And those are kind of the two key arms there. One, global hubs, which is about partnerships and training and skills, and the other being digital tools that allow you to kind of help yourself and really sort of triangulate where we are and where we want to go and what makes sense.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're really hoping to be the beneficiaries of both of those aspects. We're going to stay tuned, and hopefully we can get more training from you and become, I guess, part of that hub in Canada. So certainly we are looking forward to this. And I think your last answer really answered Amy's last question too, so that's good. I think we are now just coming up to 10:30 here. So I think with that, thank you everybody for your questions. And thank you so much, Matthew and Jordy. This was amazing. We learned a ton, and we really appreciate your expertise, and we appreciate your willingness to actually deliver this webinar to us. So thank you very much to everybody too. We have recorded this, and we're just trying to figure out the technology as to how exactly we're gonna get it posted. But stay tuned, we will be sending out a link so you can hopefully follow up and watch the portions that you want to watch again. So that being said, thanks again. And unless, Matthew and Jordy, if you have anything else to add, otherwise I think we will just say this is the end of the webinar and send people on their way for their busy days.
Yeah, well, thank you very much to all of you. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah, indeed. It's really our pleasure to share the learnings from our perspective way over here in Europe. And yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's always really interesting to engage with people that are interested in the topic and that can see the sort of early signs of change. So however we can advance that and accelerate that, it's yeah, that's really why we come to work every day. So that's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I look forward to hearing from you all. And yeah, stay tuned. We'll be working together over the next couple of years on really getting more of our communities engaged in this project. So thanks again, and have a great day, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.